The popular narrative about the St. Louis Rams since that 2012 NFL draft, where they executed that big deal to swap with the Washington Redskins so the Redskins could take RG3 and the Rams would get this big bounty of picks, where that the St. Louis Rams were the big, huge winners and that they made themselves into long-term contenders because of this type of deal and blah, blah, blah. Well, the simple fact of the matter is that over the past couple of years, myself and many others have incredibly overrated the St. Louis Rams as one of these surprise type of teams that are on the cusp. They weren't on the cusp of shit. And yeah, you could sit there and look back at 2014 and see the potential at times of this team. You look at the way they dominated Peyton Manning and the Broncos in the regular season. They beat the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, they beat some good teams. This is still not a good football team. And we could talk about how much better they supposedly came out on the other end from that RG3 deal with the Redskins, but at the end of the day, they're picking in the top 10 the same as the fucking Washington Redskins are. It's not exactly like this deal has led to a bunch of playoff appearances for the St. Louis Rams. It hasn't. It just hasn't. And it just goes to show you that you can find talented players and you could do a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, as I've talked about throughout this series so far, when it comes to these videos, you have two types of teams in the National Football League, those that have a quarterback and those that don't. And the St. Louis Rams clearly have, for many years, fit into the category of a team that doesn't have a quarterback, and as a result, it's not a surprise, and it shouldn't be a surprise to find them picking in the top 10 of the 2015 NFL Draft. It just shouldn't be. And you look back at their draft history, again, we go back to the RG3 deal, and all this bounty of picks that they got as a result. But at the end of the day, it didn't bring them a quarterback. It didn't bring them skill players on the offensive side of the ball that could help us said quarterback. It didn't really do a whole lot of anything. I mean, you look at some of their big hits, yeah, you could sit there and say the maneuvering to be able to move down multiple times, get Michael Brockers, he's panned out okay. He's been okay. But I still wonder at times if the Rams regret moving back from 6 to 14 in 2012 because maybe Fletcher Cox was really their guy, and that was the guy that they really wanted because, to me, he was the far superior prospect coming out of Mississippi State as opposed to Brockers coming out of LSU. 2013, their second first-round pick, Alec Ogletree, I think, has been a stud. But you look at it and you could say that you look at Greg Robinson, who was the second overall pick in 2014 that they got from the RG3 deal. He most certainly hasn't panned out. You look at their first-round pick from 2013, a guy in Tavon Austin, who they were able to move up from 16 to 8 to get, in part because of the RG3 trade. He hasn't really panned out all that well, in large part because the St. Louis Rams on offense are incompetent idiots that don't understand how to deploy a guy with his talents and skill sets. It's that simple. And they've had other successes in the draft, mostly on the defensive side of the ball, mostly on the defensive front with guys like Aaron Donald, their second first-round pick in 2014, 13th overall selection, a guy like Robert Quinn going back to 2011. But the problem is they've had some misses. Their biggest miss, of course, was Sam Bradford. They took him number 1 overall in 2010 for reasons that are still unbeknownst to me. And as a result, he busted. Flat out, he busted. And when you bust, in particular on a quarterback, you take number 1 overall, it sets your organization back for years. And it clearly has set this organization back for years. But it wasn't just Sam Bradford, his inability to stay healthy, his inability to really establish himself as a franchise quarterback that hurt. I mean, this is a team, yes, they've had hits in the draft, but they've all pretty much been on the defensive side of the ball over the past 5 years. I mean, you could point to maybe former second-round pick Brian Quick showing finally something in 2014, but he had his season cut short due to injury. You could point maybe to third-round pick Trey Mason showing something in 2014, and he did. But long-term, let's see what happens. But their biggest hits have all come on the defensive side of the ball. And as much as I've pooned on the New York Jets for years for the ridiculous draft philosophy of let's take a young quarterback and then let's help him by drafting a bunch of fucking defensive linemen, the Rams have done the same fucking thing, and I don't really understand. And frankly, I'm kind of mystified why I haven't blasted them more for this. Maybe it's because they have hit, but the Jets hit on guys like Wilkerson and Sheldon Richardson, but they still deserve to be blasted for their overall draft philosophy, as do the St. Louis Rams. How do you expect a quarterback to be successful when you're drafting defensive linemen almost every freaking year in the draft, in the first round? That's stupid. I don't care. It's stupid. And the 6-10 record in 2014 clearly proves how stupid the St. Louis Rams organization has been. And they deserve more heat, and they deserve more crap, and they deserve to be questioned and knocked more. And Les Snead and Jeff Fisher both deserve to be on the hot seat for 2015 because of this incompetence. It's that simple. And I'm not going to put kid gloves on this, not going to whitewash it, not try to play nice with this. The bottom line is, you can sit there and talk about, well, defense will take pressure off. At the end of the day, you have to be able to score points in the National Football League, which is something the Rams for years have struggled to consistently do. And if Bradford was ever going to work out, I don't know how the hell you would ever think he was going to work out, where the next year you're taking a defensive lineman. The year after that, you're taking a defensive lineman in round 1. Then the year after that, you're investing one of your 2 first-round picks in an outside linebacker. And then in 2014, one of your 2 first-round picks is on a defensive lineman. Again, it's just too much emphasis on the defense with too little payoff and too little emphasis on the offensive side of the ball. In this offseason, the biggest thing the St. Louis Rams could accomplish was moving on from Sam Bradford, and that's exactly what they did. I love the fact that they were able to turn an older, even more injury-prone, expensive quarterback in Sam Bradford into a cheaper, less injury-prone, hopefully, and inexpensive option in Nick Foles. Not only did they get that younger, cheaper option, they got a guy that's younger and cheaper, and were able to also help improve their draft position in both the 2015 and 2016 drafts. That was a job very well done by the St. Louis Rams, a real genius move of this offseason. And then the biggest signing they made was a 1-year prove-it deal for somebody like Nick Fairley, adding strength to strength. It wasn't something they buried themselves into a long-term deal for. Gives them some flexibility. You can maybe even line up Aaron Donald outside in some pass rush situations. I like what the Rams actually did in this offseason. They didn't do a lot, but what they did, I think, could potentially pay off big time come 2015. But then it comes to the NFL draft, where the Rams have gotten so much praise over the recent years. And yes, as I've referenced earlier in this video, they've had some big time hits. But at the end of the day, they're 6-10 for a reason. And they need help in this draft. This is a team that has weaknesses on both sides of the ball. Offensively, you've brought in Nick Foles. He's in the last year of his rookie contract. You need to find out what he can do. You need to give him some help at wide receiver on the outside, and you need to fortify that offensive line. You've got that second overall pick last year. Greg Robinson is going to step in long-term at left tackle now that you've cut Jake Long, but you need help on that offensive line, and you need to give him some weapons to work with, Nick Foles, on the outside as well. And then defensively, I think their secondary has been less than stellar over the past few years. They've got young options that people seem to like, but again, they need help, both at corner and at safety. And I think they could use another edge rusher. You look at the situation and you see Chris Long, who's got a big salary cap number, and how much longer is he going to be into the fold? At the end of the day, their defensive identity is going to be that defensive line. And you can never have enough edge rushers in the NFL. And frankly, the Rams could use another edge rusher to provide both depth and talent and long-term organizational flexibility and security for them to protect them against having to carry Chris Long's cap number long-term. In terms of their draft philosophy, I still think they have to address the offensive side of the ball early and often. Until they do that, they're not going anywhere. You bring in Nick Foles, and Nick Foles isn't exactly a huge upgrade over Sam Bradford, let's be honest here. Bringing in Foles is a benefit in terms of the lower cap number, the youth, maybe being able to actually count on him to play a full season, even though he didn't finish last season. He missed half the season. You have to help him out. This is an area that this team has criminally neglected for multiple drafts now, and they must address it. They must address that offensive side of the ball early and often. That's not to sit there and say that they need to sit there and just only focus on it, because again, as I referenced a little bit earlier, they have needs on both sides of the ball. In this case, I guess you could argue the Rams have to go a best player available philosophy. In terms of this draft, though, I think the Rams, with all the picks that they've had over recent years, need to be willing to be aggressive and need to really be willing to go up and make a big move if they need to. From pick number 10, if they determine that Kevin White is a type of difference maker that they need, they're Julio Jones type of guy, then if they need to trade up into the top 4 or 5 in order to get him, then that's what they need to do. If they need to sit there and trade up out of the second round back up into the first round to get a second first-round pick, which is something that I would entertain that maybe they need to do, then they need to do that. They need to do that. Maybe they can sit there and take a gamble on a guy like Dorial Green Beckham. He's there in Missouri, or he was at one point in time, you could sit there and argue that maybe they would have more background information on him than anybody else. This is a team that's willing to take gambles on character risk, take chances, and that those type of chances can pay off really big. You could look at this team taking an offensive lineman, a number 10 potentially, and trading back up into the bottom portion of round 1 to get a guy like Dorial Green-Beckham, and that could make a lot of sense for this team. And that's the type of approach that they think the Rams should take. They need to be willing to be aggressive in the opposite way, where they've been aggressive in years past to maneuver largely down the draft board. I think this particular time they need to be willing to be aggressive in terms of moving up the draft board, because they don't need a ton of pieces. They just have some key needs in some key areas, most notably on the offensive side of the ball, that must be addressed in this draft.